The World Rapid Play Championship is over. Magnus Carlsen was the winner. And now we move on to the World Blitz Championship, held over 2 days, again in Almaty in Kazakhstan. 21 rounds. 3 minutes on the clock for both players, 2 seconds increment per move. Well, Magnus Carlsen is one of the favourites to win the Blitz, but he had a bumpy start. He arrived late for the first round, stuck in a traffic jam apparently, dashed into the tournament hall and had just 30 seconds on his clock right at the start of the game. But he actually managed to win that first round game incredibly, even though he started with just 30 seconds. One of the other favourites is Hikaru Nakamura. Now, this really is Naka's speciality, Blitz. He didn't play well in the Rapid. At a certain point, he just obviously gave up, lacked all motivation. But Blitz, I think this is the one that he feels could be for him. So I'd like to show you one of his games. This was played in round 6 against Fabiano Caruana, so Nakamura with white. And Naka had an excellent start. I think up till this moment, I think he just dropped a half. C4. And now A3 from Nakamura. Well, typical of the kind of pragmatic play in Blitz. And he just wants to take Caruana out of theory. Of course, A3 isn't such a terrible move. You know, if we flip the colours, then basically Nakamura is playing a Sicilian with an extra tempo, and A3 or A6 could be a useful move. C6, so it's a kind of alapin with the pawn on A3. D4. Now here, I think the most sensible move is to take here. And yeah, it's a normal alapin with the inclusion of this move, but it doesn't make a huge difference. But Caruana played E4. Now that is very ambitious. D5 is a good move to prevent black from playing D5, and it slightly cuts off this pawn. F5, very aggressive. When you play with your F pawn, you have to watch out for your king. Your king can become exposed. Knight C3. I think this is a really interesting moment. Nakamura, he moves so quickly. But it's not just that. He makes big decisions. He doesn't play nothing moves. He makes big decisions very quickly. And he exchanged on C6. Now, how many of us would just give up that pawn on D5, which carves out territory? It's interesting, you know, he changes the nature of the position and suddenly there's a little bit of pressure here, and that bishop is a beautiful blockader on F4. It's going to be very hard for black to advance this pawn, and that means that, well, this bishop is stymied, the F file is closed. Very interesting moment. Bishop E7 at H3, very pragmatic. This ensures that this bishop stays on the board. You know, if you'd played Knight E2, just developing, then black would be able to swipe that bishop. Then it's not so clear. But H3 is actually an excellent move, allowing the bishop to drop back to H2 if necessary. Castles, Knight E2. So now the knight can develop. A5 looks reasonable to try and control those queenside pawns. Knight D4. So this is a bit annoying for black. The knight hits the pawn on C6, preventing this knight from developing. And if black were to play C5, then you can see, you know, these squares are weak. That's a weak pawn, not good. So bishop D7 from Caruana defends that pawn and looks to develop the knight. And again, from Nakamura, a very quick move and a very decisive move. Just takes the game by the scruff of the neck. He played C5. Very interesting. Didn't think long about it. You know, I think that's very impressive. A lot of people can make kind of you know, these bishop e2, castles, these simple moves, routine moves very quickly. Nakamura makes these decisive moves quickly, moves that change the nature of the position. But he doesn't brood on them. Now, if that's taken, then the bishop comes into the game with check. And knight e6. And that's a very good endgame for white. The bishops look fantastic. That pawn on f5 is under fire. These pawns are really ugly. It's a tremendous position for white. So Caruana played d5, but you can see that now this diagonal is open. That bishop is absolutely wonderful. The knight has a beautiful, solid, safe square in the middle on d4. Just looming over into black's position. And now it has security. b4, of course, to protect this pawn. And this is a very healthy queenside overlap as well. Queenside pawn majority. Reminds you of rugby when you've got an overlap on the wing. Or just off the wing here. So, yeah, knight a6, the knight develops. Attacking this pawn. Could take this off and just castle. But rook b1, Nakamura just keeps it steady. Caruana exchanges and plays knight c7. Bishop e2, white needs to castle. Knight e6. In fact, I think Caruana has done reasonably well just to reach this position, actually. I mean, a few moves ago, it was looking as though black was going to struggle just to develop. But still, white is very much in control in this position. So the bishop now takes the place of the knight. It was on a great diagonal here. It's on a great diagonal on d4 as well. Bishop e6. Castles. Knight d7. And again, here is a very interesting moment. I think if I were playing white, you know, particularly in a blitz game, I wouldn't hesitate here. I'd just go queen d2, which prevents this pawn advancing, connects the rooks. Looks very reasonable to me. f4. Now, if this pawn remains on f4, then white has definitely gained something because it really does lock in black's pieces. That pawn is fixed. But of course, black is going to take. You see, I find that very interesting. I can imagine if Carlsen had that position, he wouldn't do that. I think he would prefer to keep a safer king. But Nakamura just played this really quickly, and it just puts all the pressure on his opponent. And it's tricky, because suddenly the bishop is trained on d5, which means that b5 could be a very interesting possibility to undermine the pawn on d5. Queen c7. Knight e2, the knight swings round. So yeah, that's very interesting. You know, I would have imagined that somehow he would be going for a b5, but maybe he didn't like the look of the queen coming down the diagonal. So this knight moves here, possibly to f4, but it covers g3 as well. Knight e5. Feels like Caruana is getting back, but Nakamura didn't let off the pace at all. And Caruana was, yeah, running short on time. All the pressure was on him. Bishop attacked. Drops back. And now Naka makes the break. b5. And it's a very powerful move. So the point is, if pawn takes pawn, this pawn is under fire. So this can be taken. And knight takes. And black's position is falling apart. The queen is attacked. And it has to defend the bishop and the knight. Not so simple. So therefore, after b5, well, black has to improvise, but it's really not a good position. Rook a5. b6. That is quite a protected passed pawn and supported by the rook as well. So it's looking good for Nakamura, and he just kept going. Playing quickly. Queen c2. Knight c4. Knight d3. Just making sure that the c5 pawn is protected. f4. So this is a bit of a randomizer from Caruana. He's giving up the f-pawn, hoping to bring this bishop into play and cause some confusion. Well, another very interesting moment where Nakamura didn't find the best move, but he found an unpleasant move for black. In fact, it's possible to take this and then give this one up and swing the queen over. And this is actually very unpleasant for black, with pressure here. And, for example, after this, bishop g4. Basically, white is clearing the E and F files, and you can see this rook is just completely misplaced. And this is just going to be too much for black, basically. You know, white is going to be able to break through here to the king, or the b-pawn will queen. But that was obviously too much for Nakamura to calculate, and he played this pragmatic move, queen c3. So stepping out of any potential trouble here, but also looking down at g7. Now, that is very uncomfortable for black, because suddenly, you know, you're looking out for that b-pawn, and now white switches to the other side of the board and starts attacking g7, and that could be fatal if white takes there. Rook a3 has to be good to get the rook away from the queen and attack the queen here. Rook b3, an exchange. Now, it's possible to take the exchange, and well, white is still doing very well here because of that pawn, but it's tricky. But Caruana went for pawn takes. And now queen a4 again is a strong move, looking at this pawn. But knight b4. And here, actually, Caruana is still in the game. If he'd found queen g3 with the idea of bishop g5 to f4, and suddenly things are turning around. But, you know, by this stage, Caruana had been under pressure for the whole game, and running short of time, he collapsed. He was concerned about the c-pawn, of course. You know, you don't have time to calculate or even spot, you know, mad moves like queen g3. He just defended the pawn. And then knight takes d5, and black's position collapses completely. So queen hits the knight, which looks through to the king. The knight hits the bishop. That has to be taken. Bishop takes pawn check. King in the corner. Rook's exchanged. Bishop takes c4. Well, after that little flurry, you can see that white is left with these passed pawns, and it's absolutely hopeless for black. Here's how the game ended. And c6. An emphatic victory at the end. Although there were, you know, objectively, when you look at some of these positions, well, Caruana seemed like he was still in it. I mean, I watched the game online, and you just had the impression that Caruana was just bundled off the board here. And right from very early on, right from round about here actually, you felt that Caruana was struggling to find a really good plan in this position. And it was a very impressive performance from Nakamura. I mean, looking at his games today, he has that knack of sensing when is the right moment to strike, when is the right moment to hold back and play solid, and when do you strike forward and, you know, sack a piece, sack a pawn, just to keep up the pressure. He's very, very impressive at Blitz. And indeed, after day one, after 12 rounds, Hikaru Nakamura is in the lead with 10 out of 12. A point clear of a pack of players on 9. Giri, Carlsen, Dubov, Rapport, Martirosyan. Yeah, There we go. 5 players, all on 9 points. So, 21 rounds in total. So we've got 1 day left. Let's see what happens. But at the moment, Nakamura looking good. He's in the lead.